Hey, what's up everyone? Isaac Justice here with the Fusion Pipeline, and welcome to a 3D modeling lesson here in Autodesk Maya, where we will work on building a brake disc or rotors for a vehicle. In this two-part series, we will cover the base part of the rotor, followed by the inner grate that's between the inside of the rotor, which is also known as the louvers, with a simple trick to minimize time on our project. And in the second part, we'll use that same method to make bolts while also building the wheel hub. All right, let's jump right to it. First, let's create a pipe by going to Create, Polygon Primitives, Pipe. With our Rotate tool, we're going to rotate the pipe on the x-axis to say 90 degrees. Now in the input settings for our pipe, we're going to increase the radius a bit. Now I've seen certain rotors that are just about the size of the wheel. Disgusting to me. But we're not going to focus on doing that. We're just going to make the standard size rotors. So let's change the radius to about 17. Next, we'll set the height to 1.5, maybe 1.3. Now for the subdivision axis, 40 would be sufficient. However, the geometry that we'll create inside the rotor will account for the subdivisions on the base. So we're going to set the subdivision axis to 72. All right, let's increase the thickness a bit, maybe 5.7. Actually, let's go for 5.5. It doesn't have to be perfect considering, well, we're going to be putting the wheel hub in the front, so it shouldn't necessarily matter. Okay, I'm going to move our geometry into position behind the wheel. Now I'll just hide the tire and the wheel since I have a layout of the rotor. All right, we're going to duplicate our geometry to create the back of the rotor. But before we do that, we're going to add some edge loops to the rotor for now. We're doing this because when we smooth our geometry, the render engine won't make it look fake. But here at the Fusion Pipeline, we try to make things look realistic. So let's select our Insert Edge Loop tool. And we're going to apply 8 edge loops along the edges of our rotor. So just follow along. Nice. Let's now tap 3 on our keyboard. All right, looks good. Keep in mind, this is just a temporary smooth mesh preview. So it doesn't show up in the render engine unless you actually apply an actual smooth modifier. The 3 key just shows how your model would look once it's smooth. Now let's go ahead and clone or duplicate our rotor. I'm simply just holding Shift and using the Move tool to push it back on the Z-axis to about maybe 6, between 6 and 7. All right, so far so good. Now let's combine our geometry here by selecting both sets here, and we're going to go to Mesh, Combine. As you see, the smooth mesh preview still works. Now let's create a cube. This next part would be tedious, but what we're getting ready to do will make this process extremely easy. As long as you know math and basic division with degrees, you're going to be perfectly fine. Let's select our rotor real quick, and we're going to get rid of the history. So we're going to edit, delete by type, history, and clean up our outliner. I'm also going to rename this pipe. Now, we'll select our cube, and we're going to change some parameters. We'll move it in between the front and back of the rotors. Let's change our width a bit. I think 1 would work for now. We may have to go back to it. The height, we'll set it to 4.1 for now. The depth will be about 1.2. Now, back to our height, I want to make it just about the same size as the rotor. So let's change it to 5.4. Then let's go back to our depth And let's change it to about 1.8. Let's switch to wireframe view so we can see our geometry better on the cube. Okay, that's a bit much, so let's change our depth. 1.5. Yeah, that's good. Our width is also a bit much, so we're going to change that to 0.5. Nice, looking good. So in the front view, we see our cube is in the center of the rotor, but we want to move it up inside the edges of the rotor. Let's switch to the wireframe view here, and let's move our cube up. It might be too tall on the height. Let's take a look. Maybe move it down just a bit. All right, that height is actually perfect here. And in the perspective view, it's placed perfectly into position. And I'm going to explain why in just a bit. Let's go ahead and select the base of the rotor. And we're going to hide it by tapping the H key. Now, we'll select the cube and we'll add some edge loops since we'll be smoothing this as well. Keep in mind, if you're using this brake disc on like a car model or just to render an image of the tire, rim, rotor, and like the brake caliper, you don't really need to do this part because it's not going to be visible. But for my case, it's going to be shown with what project I'm working on. All right, let's take a look. Whoops. I forgot to add just a couple more edge loops, so hold on. Add one here and here. All right, let's give it a quick smooth mesh preview, and we're looking good. All right, let's go ahead and unhide the brake disc. So here is the reason why we placed the cube perfectly into position and why we set the subdivisions on the brake disc to 72. If you look at a reference image of a rotor, most would have a wide range of ventilating louvers in between the splash shield of the rotor. Naturally, you have many options on building the inside louvers, like extruding the top of the rotor, but it gets time consuming. With this simple method here in Maya, we're going to take one cube and duplicate it around the edges of the rotor. You can duplicate it and rotate the cube and then just put them into place, but you're going to have to do that like 71 times. But with Maya has an amazing feature called Duplicate Special, where you can create all 71 pieces of geometry in just seconds, perfectly keeping everything in position. Now we're going to do that by simply selecting a cube and moving our gizmo down, just the gizmo, to the center of our scene. So let's hold the D key, which activates the gizmo to be moved anywhere in the scene. And you're also going to hold down the X key, which will snap our gizmo to the center of the grid when you move it down. Now, let's take our rotate tool, and you can see as you rotate the cube, it stays in place, rotating along the inside of the rotor. All right, let's go ahead and delete the history. Now, let's hold Shift, and we're going to rotate the cube, which duplicates the geometry. What we're looking for on the rotate Z is the parameter to which we'll be duplicating. Now, if we set it to say -5, you notice how the duplicated cube stays lined up with the edge of the rotor. This will be the building block we'll need to duplicate all 71 pieces. All right, let's delete this duplicated cube here. Now we're going to select our main cube. We're going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special, but we're going to click on the square next to the name, which is going to bring up the Options tab. As you see, I already have the settings updated previously building this. You caught me. So over on the rotate Z-axis, it's set to -5. And the number of the copies is set to 71. In terms of math, 72 degrees is exactly 1/5 or 20% of 360 degrees. Or you can just easily divide 360 degrees by 5, which will give you 72. But since we already have a cube already in place, you want to change it from 72 to 71. So we'll click apply. And you see here all 72 cubes are perfectly aligned with our rotor. Now, we'll close this box here. This is looking really good. I'm excited. This is looking really good so far. All right, let's select all 72 pieces of the cube and we're going to combine them. Next, we're going to go ahead and delete the history. And we can also rename our geometry. Now we're getting somewhere. So in the next lesson, we're going to build the wheel hub that connects to the main rotor. We're also going to use the same method we used to make the ventilation louvers for the bolts on the hub. So stay tuned and I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you for watching.